In this lesson, we will be showing how to create puffy jackets. Before we begin, it's important to note that puffiness in V-Stitcher is only for visualization purposes. We will cover this in more detail later in the lesson. For this example, we have already stitched up the bodice and sleeves. We have also applied a smart zipper along the center front. When creating puffy jackets, there are two main points to take note of: puffy lines, fabric physics. We need to create the quilting lines on the bodice. To do so, we can draw the first line at the top or the bottom. Here the lines are already drawn on the patterns. Then we do a clone by offset to duplicate the lines on the bodice. Obviously, you can skip this step if your pattern already have the quilting lines. We need to ensure that we use extend, shrink for the internal lines. For the edges, we can also use clone by offset. If you have other designs for the quilting lines, feel free to draw your own quilting lines on the patterns. Great, now that we have quilting lines, we can proceed to puff up the garment. To create the puffy effect on the garment, we must first select the fabric to apply to the garment. Next, we go to Physics and ensure that we have enabled puffy firmness. We recommend working with a single layer for this type of garment. With puffy firmness checked, the software automatically adds another layer to the garment. To control the puffiness of the garment, we need to adjust the values for thickness and puffy firmness. Thickness is the overall thickness of the puffy fabric, including the insulation width. When puffy is enabled, thickness dictates the total width of the insulated material and not the thickness of the fabric itself. Puffy firmness is how stiff and puffed up we want the garment to be. Think of it as the inside stuffing between puffy walls. The higher the value, the more compact it will be. These two are interrelated and directly affect the puffiness of the garment. Low thickness with high puffy firmness creates a balloon-like effect in the garment. High thickness with low puffy firmness creates more creases on the garment. Note that the fabric physics also affects how the thickness and puffy firmness simulates. That's why we recommend testing different values to see which works best. That is also why we mention that puffy garments in V-Stitcher are for visualization purposes, as we alter the values based on the look we want to achieve. In addition, we would not be able to measure the amount of down the garment needs for a physical garment using the 3D garment values. You can download garment files in the Download section and look at some of the values we recommend in these examples. Once we've adjusted values, we can close the dialog box. To replace the current default fabric, we drag and drop to replace the fabric. Let's view the simulated results. Next, the quilting lines. In the 2D window, we multi-select the internal lines and give them puffy property. Again, let's see the simulation. If a line has the puffy property, we can adjust the baffle wall height. Here's an example of the puffy lines without baffle wall height and width. If there are additional pattern pieces stitched onto a pattern with puffy, we can also decide if the piece is stitched to the outer or inner layer of the puffy walls. When we add puffy lines, the lines can look sharp. If we want to have a slightly smoother transition at the quilting line, we can select the smooth property. We can smooth both inner and outer, or inner or outer only. Note that the change is subtle and is not noticeable with the default grid size. We can also apply rounded to the edges of a puffy garment by applying the puffy property with the rounded finish effect. When creating a puffy garment, we can adjust the values for puffy firmness and thickness until we achieve the look that we want. Since this is only for visualization purposes, the values may differ for different pattern pieces. For example, the area at the chest may require a larger puffy firmness value as the pattern piece is tighter. In cases like this, we clone the existing fabric, adjust the physics, and apply these to the pattern. Puffy garments may have sharper looking edges when simulating, with the default grid size of 1. To improve the look, we reduce the grid size to be able to see more details like creases. This makes the puffy effect look more natural. Remember that reducing grid size drastically may affect the speed of the simulation, as there are more grids to simulate. Puffy garments also tend to take longer to simulate. Don't forget the fast mode option, which speeds up simulation. Last but not least, to add more creases to the quilting lines, we can use the shrink option. Typically, we can add shrinkage to the quilting lines of between 2 to 10%, depending on the look we want to achieve. Different lines may even have different values. For example, we may want to add a higher shrinkage value to areas which are tighter. Now, before a final simulation, we need to remember to turn off fast mode. Here's a tip. After turning off fast mode, allow the garment to simulate for a while before finishing the simulation. Once that's all done, we can apply all the other suitable materials to complete the garment. And that is how you create puffy garments in VStitcher. For more information, visit support.browseware.com.